down.
Yeah, I need
My
some
understanding
cheerful.
is somewhere in Greece, but you know, it's I think during these times you need something, anything.
I need to be in Greece. Actually, I need to be in Paris. I'm supposed to be, I'm supposed to be in Paris in a couple of weeks for my birthday, but apparently that's not going to happen. So, and that's okay. That's okay. I'm all right. Oh, I'm all right. Okay, add interpreter. English to Spanish is Glenda. Oh, I don't know what it's doing. Hold on a second. Let me let George, I think that's Georgina. Okay. Oh no, it's Erin. She can wait. Okay. Yeah, because what time is it? Okay, yeah, that's too early. We're not ready yet. Sit in the waiting room. There should be. It looks great on my end. Are you okay on your end? Is that how you want it to look?
Well, so this is the first time I'm screen sharing, so I don't know how. Now I understand why people aren't sure if it's sharing correctly. So if you're seeing it, then that helps.
Okay. And so do you see what you want to see?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just
Do
making
you,
sure you're seeing the same thing.
yeah, you can also, virtual seed, there she is, admit. You can also like enlarge the screen however you want. You can make it full, you can make it small, however you would like. Georgina, are you there? Unmute. Georgina?
Yeah, hi, I can see you now, sorry.
I can see a lot of you too.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so Georgina, there's one person in the waiting room. We're just setting up right here, so I haven't let anyone in. At about 10:01, because we're just setting up, could you possibly just start letting the people come in?
Sure.
Okay. And then April is my co-host, and I'm also going to make you a co-host.
Great.
Okay. So you'll be able to let everyone in. April will be able to.
You want me to start letting, or now?
In a minute. Give us a second, because I'm trying to set up Glenda. Here she is.
I'll be right back.
Supposed to be my interpreter. Okay, great. Hey, Glenda.
Good morning, good morning.
Okay, I need to make you, for some reason, it's not letting me, hold on, I have someone in the chat. Okay, I need you to, I'm trying to get you to be my, not closed caption person. What do you call that person? Interpreter. And for some reason, it's not doing this. So give me your email address. Or wait a minute, Glenda. There we go. So English to Spanish. If we don't have any Spanish families, give it 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then I say go ahead and just, you know, pop off. Don't pop off, Glenda, but pop off.
Understood.
Okay. So I'm gonna move you over right now. So we might lose you. Okay. English and Spanish interpretation available. So am I still hearing you? So you're gone. Okay, if you have any questions, wave at me, okay? All right, I'm gonna go back to English. Okay, Georgina, are you there?
Yep.
Okay. Glenda's on the Spanish channel.
Great.
Okay. Geez, Louise. Okay. And this is recording, so they can see all the shenanigans that are happening before. I'm totally gonna cut this video. All right. So we have.
Let me know when I can start admitting. There's a couple of people.
Okay. April, whenever you are ready to go. We have a couple of people
Okay.
in the
Glenda.
chat. So, Georgina,
Yeah,
how do I pin only April?
pin only April. I think you just go to the right of her on her picture
Uh-huh.
on that little 3 buttons.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Now we have 3 customers waiting.
Okay. I say it, oh, where did April go? I think go ahead and admit them. And
Okay.
then let's see where she is. So, Glenda, give everybody about 15 minutes, and then if we don't see anyone, I'll let you know. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so, oh, great. I'm switching over. Glenda, yes, what did you say? Okay.
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Here we go, April. We have a couple of people popping up in the room. All right. I'm going to let this go. And just in time, the garbage people are coming. That's nice. All right. Let's see here. Hi, Erin. How are you? All right. I think we have like a few people popping in. So I am going to just say, you know, welcome to everyone. Give us about 2 minutes and then we're going to start. Or at least like a minute and a half so the garbage man can go by. He's very loud. Okay. All right. All right. So we are going to. All right. Yay, more people, more people. Okay. All right. I think that's maybe enough time. April, are you all set up and ready?
I believe so. And you can see my screen, just making sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So welcome everybody to the Turning 3 workshop. It's a workshop that our early childhood parents tend to go to because they want to learn the process of transitioning into our special education public schools, and also sometimes not just public schools. There's a lot to offer in the process of obtaining an IEP. Right now, most people who are in here are under 3. And under 3, you have an IFSP, an Individualized Family Service Plan. And when you turn 3, you get an IEP, which is an Individualized Education Program. So there's a whole process to it. And April is here to kind of walk you guys through that process. And she works with the Family Resource Navigators. And I will turn it over to April to give you a little explanation as to who Family Resource Navigators are, and to let you know a little bit more about her and what they do. Go ahead, April. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Sean Renee. So my name is April Keeley. I am a parent of 2 children with special needs. Both of them have IEPs, and one actually attended CEID over when he was starting at 3. So I've been a parent who's been there, and I pretty much, because of my children's journey, I ended up working at an agency, Family Resource Navigators, which is a really peer parent network. We're part of the Family Resource Network in California, and so FRN serves Alameda County, and a lot of the services that we provide, in addition to IEP support and also 504 plan support, we also provide community resources for basic needs, because as an agency, we feel that in order to springboard children to be successful, we as an agency, we feel also as parents, supporting other parents, that guiding families with basic need services like housing and rent, and especially during these times right now with COVID-19, resources for things like when the stimulus information came out, a lot of families didn't know how to navigate through that and whether their families qualified. And so, providing that type of information, providing food pantry support for families who never thought they would need it and found out they needed those types of support, internet services. So really a lot of those types of basic needs, in addition to guiding families who have children with, disabilities, also behavioral support. So just a lot of really family-oriented services, and FRN is a nonprofit agency as well. So again, serving families within Alameda County definitely for over 20 years, and recently became a more independent nonprofit. If any of you are familiar with Alameda First 5 and Oakland, there is a nonprofit agency called Bananas. And so FRN used to be affiliated with Bananas, but as of a few years ago became a freestanding nonprofit. So that's really FRN's background. And for myself as a parent, being a parent volunteer for CEID, being a parent volunteer for my children's schools, and also floating in and out, being a parent volunteer for FRN, I became officially an employee a few years ago. And for all of the services that FRN supports, that is what I did. And I'm currently doing right now. So I have transitioned into the Early Start program. And Family Resource Navigators Early Start program does actually what this workshop is going to guide all of you through, is really showing families that, when you have a child who has Early Start services from birth to 3, that once your child turns 3, the services can become very different. And sometimes it can be an overwhelming process. And so really the goal here and the workshop objectives, is to really build confidence in all of you that this is something that is achievable. And even if you don't know or understand the entire process, as a parent, I highly encourage that it's okay to ask questions if you don't understand anything within, any of the processes in terms of transitioning your child from early start services to over 3. Often it's called over 3. Other resources during this process also includes those children who qualify for regional center services. There might be other questions about insurance and other behavioral supports, but primarily usually most parents and caregivers at Turning 3 workshops have questions about, school assessments, which usually leads to IEPs and sometimes leads to 504 plans. And I can talk more about that later on. But again, these are the workshop objectives. Shauna Renee will be able to send a copy of this PowerPoint so that you'll have this as reference. A lot of it, for some of you, it might seem like a lot of information. I won't go over everything in detail. I will talk about it. And I encourage all of you to ask questions. If there are things that you already know or seems repetitive, it's okay to let me know and I can, delve into more advanced topics if needed. But for now, I'm just making an assumption that, these are just some of the basic services that parents usually don't realize that their child might be eligible for. And so can talk more again as the workshop progresses. So one of the first things I feel it's important to share with families is there is a distinction between early start services for children who are aged 0 to 3. And this is covered under a federal law called IDEA. So it's, and for children who, again, are under 3, it's called IDEA Part C, or and IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And since this is a federal law, it provides early intervention services for infants and toddlers. And in general, to be eligible, your child has to have at least a 33% delay or be at risk. So for those families who receive early start services, and as most of you know already, it's very family focused, very family driven. It's really geared toward providing all of those early intervention services so that, not just the child, but the family can succeed in terms of overall home support in a natural setting. And as Shauna Renee already mentioned, your child will have an IFSP, which stands for Individualized Family Service Plan. And officially it's supposed to be, at minimum reviewed every 6 months because, and it's 6 months or as often as needed because as your child ages or grows and changes and develops and all of the things that most of you are going through, you notice there might be certain red flags that pop up. And so it's one of those things that, I've always encouraged other parents is, if you have questions, ask, and don't be afraid. Even the simplest of questions, usually in terms of early start services, are usually very generously answered. Usually 90 days before your child turns 3, early start services end. And that is, and when I mean end, it literally ends. So most families usually aren't prepared for the process. If your child already has an IFSP plan, usually the case manager or program manager who is tied to that IFSP will definitely, start the process at least 90 days beforehand. And there is a transition process which happens, and it's meant so that your child and the child's family does not have a gap in services, so that there isn't a period where there's no services. Some of you are receiving home visits. Some of your families are receiving speech therapy or maybe audiology services. And so usually that transitions to the school district through a referral process. And sometimes that's initiated if your child is also eligible for regional center services. The regional center case manager might assist with that process as well. And so once a referral process is tied to your child's school district, then at age 3, your child is considered school age. And so this is another part of the federal law, or the federal, which is called IDA Part B. And unlike Part C, this is geared toward education. So the shift from family focus and early intervention focus, it now shifts toward education. So all of the things that most families were used to in terms of early start, it is a big transition, because once there's an education focus implemented, one of the things that we're all used to as parents is that, well, what's best for my child in terms of educational support? And one of the things that I will talk about later is that usually IDEA in terms of the Part B process is, whether fortunately or unfortunately, it depends how you look at it from a particular lens, is because it's educational driven, what families would think of as best or needed for their child is not necessarily what's written into IDEA Part B. It's, again, focused on education. It's focused on providing services if your child is eligible. And so if your child is eligible, it doesn't always necessarily mean that your child will get certain services unless you advocate for that. So we can talk about that more later on in this discussion. But an IEP, or an individualized education plan, is at minimum renewed annually, and this is if your child is found eligible. So we can go through the process that happens with transition. So just to talk a little bit more about just the birth to 3 process. For early start, as I mentioned, your child might be receiving services with the regional center. If your child, and then especially in this population, as with mine, who are identified as deaf and hard of hearing, school district definitely puts in support, because usually regional center, if your child is identified as deaf and hard of hearing only, regional centers doesn't usually offer deaf and hard of hearing support, the school district does. And so school district, at least with my child, provided placement services at CEID, which is usually referenced as a non-public school, because the school district deemed that as appropriate placement for my child at the time, who needed deaf and hard of hearing services, which was not offered in their school district. So this was all part of the early start process. A lot of the other service can also include, physical therapy, PT, OT, speech, sometimes behavioral services. And with all early start services, it's all, again, family-based. So you might have a center-based program like CEID, or you can have home visits from a person who will come to your home and provide physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, or other sort of family-centered services that relate, again, family and child. Usually during this time, you might find support through insurance for those who have Medi-Cal or private insurance. Funding is usually when it's deemed medically necessary. So again, if you want private physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, and other services, if your child is eligible, then many families go through that route. There's also behavioral health services. And for families who have a child who is deaf and hard of hearing, sometimes there are other co-occurring conditions where your child might be diagnosed as deaf or hard of hearing, and might be also diagnosed with, ADHD or autism, and so, or even other sort of anxiety related diagnoses. And so that's where these behavioral health services come in place during early intervention, again, to provide these supports through the families. And usually again, anytime it's insurance related, it's always based on medical need or medical necessity. So usually with early start services, you kind of have to think about it in terms of family focus and family centered. If you're advocating for insurance, you have to think about it in terms of what's medically necessary, and have documentation and writing really shaped in that perspective. And so these are usually sort of the tips, because the language and the documentation that you provide or that you're requesting really makes a difference. Because if you're requesting insurance services and you're just saying, well, because my child needs it, you might receive a denial, because unless it's framed as, again, medically necessary by your child's pediatrician or specialized doctor, then there's a higher chance for insurance to reject services unless it's framed, again, as medically necessary. So just a few tips for families who might not know how the language can be important. And just delving a little bit more into transition to 3, as I mentioned, IDEA Part C, which is for children who are under 3, early start services end on a child's birthday. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It ends at a child's 3rd birthday, but as reassurance, the transition process should start at least 90 days before your child turns 3, so that there is no gaps in services. For those families receiving insurance through private or Medi-Cal, they continue as long as your child is and your child's primary care provider deems that these services are medically necessary, then they will continue. For regional center, and often their parents have questions about this, if your child qualifies for regional center services under 3, your child's regional center case manager should be starting a transition process, again, at least 90 days before, so that there is no gap in services, to see if your child qualifies for regional center services over 3. And the criteria for the eligibility criteria for over 3 services with regional center is that your child either has cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, or an intellectual disability, or maybe a disability related to intellectual disability. And you might have heard it also referred to as the Lanterman Act or Lanterman Services. So if you hear regional center services over 3, or regional center services status 2, or Lanterman, they all mean the same thing in terms of over 3 services with regional center. And so it is important to know that in order to be eligible, again, I just want to emphasize, child needs to have a diagnosis of either cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, or an intellectual disability. And I just want to add a cautionary note that even if your child has any of these diagnoses, it needs to be a substantial, a disability which is substantial and affects a child's really functioning in terms of everyday, in terms of everyday functionality, and at least usually they deem it as 3 areas of, and generating, if I don't have this correctly, please chime in, but it has to do with enabling really an independent life. So, so let's see here in the second slide.
That is correct.
Yeah, I'm stumbling on this because, yeah, so really substantial developmental disability. So let me step back and say that for a child who has autism, and that's one of the eligible criteria, if you have a child who is considered what they might say high functioning, so is able to speak, able to understand stranger danger, identify, who's a stranger, who's a family member, is able to understand, how to make basic transactions with a person, greetings, knows how to go to the grocery store and make a basic transaction, seems pretty typical. But there are, but officially diagnosed as autism may not qualify for regional services under the Lanterman Act, because it's not, if assessed by regional center, would not be considered a substantial developmental disability. And the same goes with a child who might have CP. You know, if that child with CP is able to, you know, go through life, you know, fairly independently and live a fairly normal life with, you know, basic support, then a child, even though has eligible diagnosis, might not qualify for regional center services, you know, under the Lanternman. So
April, I think what we want to say is basic transactions, basic and safe transactions.
yes, so basic and safe, and that's definitely something to highlight, because when this transition happens and your child's regional center case manager, if your child is receiving regional center services under 3, will be assessing for those areas. And so that's where, as a parent, you have to frame this, because if you feel that your child is eligible and should qualify, then again, as with insurance, framing documentation for medical necessity, or with IEPs that we'll talk about later, framing it where it's educationally related. For regional center services, over 3 services, families would want to frame it in terms of, without regional center services, will your child be able to, you know, be able to be safe in the home without these additional supports or not? So that's definitely something that I just want most of you to remember, because a lot of families don't realize that, and they will talk about, you know, what their child can't in. Really, it's about your whole child. If you as a parent remove yourself from the picture, is your child able to be safe and independent in the home or not? And so just as a personal example, when I had to think about why my child qualified for regional services over 3, I believe the moment when I said, and the question was asked, was, does my child understand the difference between parent and stranger? And the answer was no. Would my child be safe in the kitchen by himself? You know, would be able to understand how a microwave works? Or if an alarm went off, would be able to understand what that meant? Would be able to come to me and tell me? The answer was mostly no. So really, when it regarded safety concerns in a family-centered environment, that was why my child qualified. Even though my child was, in terms of diagnosis term, considered more high functioning, but because my child could not be safe without me there watching him most of the time, even now that he's a teenager, and that's why he still qualifies for regional center services and under the Management Act. So I just wanted to point that out. So in this next slide, I did talk about eligibility under IDEA for over 3, and these are all of the qualifying conditions for if your child qualifies for services. And many of you will hear about the Individualized Educational Plan. So in order to qualify for this, I put hearing impairment on top. And also, you know, there's visual impairment, hearing and visual impairment, deaf blindness, speech and language disorder. So this is the eligibility, and one of the first steps for that eligibility, again, is that referral process, which initiates an assessment. And so, as I noted here in the slide, for number 1, a child must require and not merely benefit from special education. So again, when you're thinking about an IEP under IDEA, as I've emphasized, it's educational based. So when it means benefit from, you want educational benefit. It's not, you know, a benefit that as a parent we might think is best for a child. It has to educationally benefit your child. So without specialized services at a school district, will your child be able to succeed educationally? Will be able to progress just like all the other kids in a general education setting? or if your child needs to be in what's referred to as a special day class, which is usually a classroom where there might be other children who have other specialized needs, and there's a special education teacher who will provide instruction. So without those types of support, other types of support could be either speech therapy or occupational therapy, or even resource support. Without all of that, will your child be able to progress in an educational setting successfully, just like his or her other peers? So that's where this eligibility becomes important, and that's where parents, as undergoing through this transition process, have to think about really more educational aspects of this transition process and sort of frame the ideas in terms of where the IEP is more family-centered based. Now you have to think about, okay, now how do I think about how to, as my child is being assessed for potential eligibility for an IEP, will my child be successful without it, educationally successful? So in terms of simple rules to remember in the assessment process or in the referral process, is the first step is assessment. So as I've mentioned, there are the eligibility criteria, and there's 14 of them in California. And so in this one, when your child is assessed, it's important that your child is assessed in all areas of suspected disability. And it's important because as parents, while we know our children best, we might know what our child might be eligible for. Other does. We don't know exactly what it might mean. And so as a personal example, my older son was officially diagnosed with autism, but I just noticed his focus wasn't quite always there. Always seemed to daydream a lot. And there was also underlying anxiety issues. And so when this assessment process happened, I could state all of my concerns in a parent letter. And I did say, please assess my child in all areas of suspected disability. And so they did, my child's school district did find, red flags for ADHD, did find red flags for what was, is considered executive functioning. And for those who don't know what executive functioning means, it just means, a person's ability really to plan your day, and also to be able to, kind of see yourself in an empathetic view as you're planning your day, to see the big picture of everything. So my child would be focused maybe on math, but would not remember to turn in his homework, or would forget to ask a question. And so those are certain really flags for executive functioning. So again, that's a personal example, but it's important that when you request an assessment, that all areas of suspected disability is happening, and that even if you can't pinpoint necessarily a diagnosis, as a parent, just really put in writing everything that you see as red flags, because as a parent, you know your child best. And during this transition process, it's really important, especially when a parent submits an assessment request letter, and that all of it's documented. You can include in an assessment request letter things like official medical diagnoses or recommendations from medical specialist or your child's pediatrician. One of the things to note is that a lot of times some of these recommendations are medically related. So again, when you're thinking about an assessment in terms of all areas of suspected disability for a school district, you have to frame it in terms of educational benefit. So again, I have here documentation of your child's needs is essential to getting a good plan and appropriate services. That is important. And to be, complete and as accurate, because the idea is that you want to share a whole picture of your child, not just from a personal perspective as a parent, but really this is one of those challenging things that for parents really to think outside of the boxes. When you remove yourself, how do you feel your child will be successful, again, in an educational setting if supports aren't implemented? So usually when the referral process happens, the school district has 15 days to respond, and they'll usually respond in the form of a notice. It's often called prior written notice, and they'll let you know that they will set up an assessment or send or have someone contact you from the school district to conduct the assessment, and that usually happens within 60 days. And in order to initiate the assessment process, or at least to agree upon what's being assessed, the parent must sign the plan first. So that's important. There's some parents who really ask for services first and forget that in order to get those services, that you must have your child assessed first. And in order to get those assessments, the parent must sign the assessment plan. So that's the first part of the referral process is the assessment process. And again, I have the timeline here, just more as reference, is that the district has 15 days to respond and 60 days to conduct the assessment. The second rule or guide is once your child is assessed, an IEP meeting is usually held, and the IEP meeting includes you as a parent or caregiver. And as a parent or caregiver, I also have to point out that you need to be the parent or caregiver who has educational rights. There might be family members here who might be grandparents or aunts or uncles. So if you don't have educational rights in this process, then while you can participate, the school district probably won't allow you to sign any documentation, because really it's usually the parent or the primary caregiver who's able to be to agree to anything in terms of IEP goals and, as if you look below, placement. So I've had questions as a family navigator with grandparents wanting to participate in the IEP team meeting to go over the assessment plan, to go over the goals. And while they are encouraged to attend, they also need to encourage the parent to attend as well. So once you have this meeting, you sort of think of the goals which are proposed for your child. So in one example, if your child has educational concerns, so in this case for the deaf and hard of hearing population, there could be sometimes social pragmatics are affected. So a lot of things, and I'll use my son as an example, conversational turn taking. So he might understand literally what's being asked of him, but to be able to respond in a timely manner, to be able to understand what's being asked of him, and to be able to respond without any sort of behavioral, what I call sometimes meltdowns, sometimes emotional dysregulation, because he was also diagnosed to be on the autism spectrum as well. So you want to make sure the goals that are being implemented are reasonable and that are something that can be achievable within a year. So one example and that I had used would be my child would be able to respond at least within 15 seconds by the end of the year, because his baseline at the time during his assessment process was that on average, he would respond to comments. It would take 30 seconds to a minute. So as a parent and as part of the team discussing this, and as other educational staff members who had assessed him felt that, okay, let's use a reasonable expectation and an IEP goal that by the end of the year, we'll see if my son will be able to respond to staff, his peers, and parents within 15 seconds, given supports such as speech services and other behavioral goals, which embedded tools to help with emotional dysregulation, because he would be increasingly stubborn about things. And so sometimes because he would dig in his heels, that provided a justifiable reason for, again, specialized education, because he needed to be in a deaf and hard of hearing special day class where a deaf and hard of hearing teacher would be able to support him at a public school to provide these goals so that he would become successful with, again, the bigger goal that he would be mainstreamed in a general education setting. So what I had to focus on also was that the goals had to be appropriate to allow for, again, adequate educational process, that they were achievable, meaningful, and measurable, that these goals weren't too low for him, but they were also weren't too high. So again, this IEP goal, particular IEP goal, I didn't make it where he had to respond instantaneously. It was achievable for him, but it was also meaningful and measurable, so that the staff within that school year would be able to give him all the tools and services, so that, you know, again, to see if he would be able to respond at the end of the year by 15 seconds. And while it might seem very specific, IEP goals can be very specific. And you can say by the end of the year, while it wasn't quite close to 15 seconds, it was anywhere between 20 to 15. But really, when you have an appropriate goal, when you have something that's achievable, and also ensuring that, you know, your child has access to general education curriculum, and that your child's teacher has, again, expectations that are reasonable and achievable. It really comes to that foundation that your parent expertise does matter, that any input that you provide, the documentation that you provide, maybe even videos from how your child acts at home when you implement certain behavioral, I guess, sometimes maybe certain behavioral keywords, or maybe there's a particular sign, home sign that you use, or particular phrase that you use. If you provide that and assist your child's staff in an educational setting to help achieve these IEP goals, really, it does matter. So in terms of setting these IEP goals, it dovetails into placement. So placement is important because you want to be able to find an educational setting where there is, you know, a school that can support your child. So after CEID, if you haven't already, kind of go to your child's school district to see what sort of specialized educational services that your child's school district might offer. If it's in place, and if it's not, your child can go to a different school district. And Sean Renee can jump in if I'm saying anything that's inaccurate. But in general, your child is not bound to the homeschool that, if you probably look it up at your child's school district homepage, they'll usually say, okay, this is where your child's homeschool is. But if you find another school in your child's school district that seems to have maybe a special day class, or have a deaf and hard of hearing program, or even just teacher and staff support that can give your child a reasonable chance of achieving IEP goals, and really to understand your child's assessment, then I encourage all families to do site visits, and encourage really to see all the different program placements in your child's school district, and even in other school districts. So again, using myself as an example, my child went to a school that was outside of his school district, and he attended that school for about 4 years. And that particular school, it was agreed upon by the IEP team after we did his assessments, after we really drafted some IEP goals. And when it came to placement, I contributed a site visit that I had visited in a school in Hayward. It happened to be Fairview Elementary, and that has a deaf and hard of hearing program that provided a special day class setting, but it also provided a general education support as well. So thinking again in terms of education, that this was an appropriate placement, the IEP team agreed that this placement would provide my son educational benefit. So again,
April?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so as far as parents going to their home school district, generally what happens is like you have Fairview. So we have Fairview, Fremont, there's Castro Valley. There's certain areas. Every single city does not have a program for deaf and hard of hearing. So within these cities, they call it like a SELPA. There's like a group, and they group together and they provide services for each other. So they kind of like intermingle, if that makes sense to the parents. I always advise parents to visit all programs, even outside of your city. You can always call San Jose. They have a program for deaf and hard of hearing students, and you can call them and say, hey, I'm moving into the area, just want to check out and see what kind of programs you have, just so you're aware of what the programs look like. I'm not saying everybody needs to move, but generally what happens is if there is a program within a set of cities, typically that's their offer when they come to the IEP process, and they will say, this is the type of program we have to offer. And it is really up to you to decide whether or not you want to take that offer. If it's if you feel it's an appropriate placement for your child. Again, there's always the option of mainstreaming or inclusion. So you also want to look at those options. Mainstreaming meaning being in your typically developing classroom with some support, or or inclusion being in there with support, or mainstreaming meaning, hey, my kid is good at math, I'm going to send him to the math class with support, but being in a special day class throughout the day. So it just depends on where your child is developmentally. When they offer that program, where is it, and what do you want to get out of it for your child?
So thank you, Sean Renee. And
yes.
And
And if anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box and I will get to them because I'm monitoring them. Okay?
Yes. So as Sean Renee did mention, you know, being able to do site visits of other programs, not just in your child's home district, but in other districts, because really to re-emphasize that you are also part of the IEP team and that you have options to offer as well. And a child's individualized education plan is just that, it's individualized. So your particular, if you're, again, if your child is eligible for an IEP and is found, you know, you're going through, you know, the assessment process and the IEP goals and considering placement, you are, as a parent or caregiver, a major contributor. And really it's customized. So your child's IEP will look very different from my child's IEP. And that's important to note that, you know, ask questions. If you're not satisfied with the current placement, ask if there are other options. You know, you're not really set to accept a placement that you're not quite satisfied with, or that you're not quite satisfied will meet the needs of your child. So in this next slide, it's just a basic definition of free and appropriate public education, or FAPE. And FAPE is a basic entitlement under IDEA. And I just want to note that this is not waived during distance learning, especially when during the COVID-19, and especially with shelter in place and with school closures. A lot of families, there was some pushback from school districts about whether to provide assessments. And at that time, timelines, as and I'll just go back a few, where a district had 15 days to respond. School districts were allowed, because of these extenuating circumstances, to delay the process. And also school districts were allowed to sort of delay the process to extend over 60 days, again, because campuses were closed. Face-to-face meetings in terms of, assessments couldn't happen because, we were all, in terms of assessments, they couldn't happen because a lot of them really are based for in-person meetings and in-person conversations and in-person evaluations and observations, oftentimes in a classroom or oftentimes in homes. And so during that time, timelines were temporarily paused. But now, as of at least September 18th, I know the governor did sign a Senate bill so that timelines should not be paused and even not waived during distance learning. So just important that, that especially now when your children are transitioned, that there shouldn't be a gap in services, and that even though assessments might be unique now, they might be more creative in terms of virtual assessments, or even parent questionnaires, or if there is face-to-face assessments, there are going to be more creative ways on how to do this safely. FAPE, also in terms of free and appropriate, there was an older ruling that free and appropriate education represents non-trivial progress on IEP goals. So this really, as I had mentioned before, had to do with not necessarily what's best for your child, but what's appropriate. And then there was another ruling in 2017 in which IEP goals must be appropriately ambitious. So again, in terms of what free and appropriate education means now is that it might not necessarily, it needs to be at least appropriate, but also be, achievable or appropriately ambitious in terms of what the team agrees to after your child's assessed. So it's okay to be, higher achieving in terms of IEP goals. As I mentioned, I gave my 15-second example. That was appropriately ambitious to do, and it wasn't. And as an IEP team, we agreed that, this was something that was achievable, and this was something that was, again, individualized for my child because of his hearing needs, because of his social needs. And again, my child's IEP will look very different than your child's IEP. And to be able to understand what free and appropriate means is important, because as you're developing and participating in this process, is that you as a parent really are one of the drivers in terms of developing IEP goals and agreeing to where your child's placed, whether it's in your child's home district or outside of the district. So just going past here. Oops. So here is parent rights and just some IEP team meeting tips. So just a few things that I do want to highlight is that when an IEP meeting is initiated and you'll receive a notice, and the meeting place should be at a mutually agreeable time and place. So now with distance learning, you might receive a virtual meeting invitation, very much like this one. And so when meetings happen virtually, again, as a parent, you are a team member. You can request materials if there are draft reports or draft goals, or even draft assessments. You can definitely ask for copies of that at least one meeting before. Sometimes personally I've received them the night before, and it's really because you as a parent or caregiver want to be able to be just as informed as the rest of the staff and the professionals who will be attending the meeting. And so those who attend the meeting could be your child's speech therapist or occupational therapist. It could be your child's current early start program manager to help assist with the transition. And most importantly, the IEP, initial IEP assessment meeting would need to include an administrative designee or someone in the district who is very knowledgeable with special education resources in the process, because without an administrative designee, the IEP meeting can't happen. So, so technically and this has happened to me once before, that if the administrative designee doesn't appear, usually we can discuss, have a meeting, but it's not an official meeting. So just want to clarify that if that ever happens to you, that technically it does not become an official IEP meeting. It becomes just a general meeting, and you can just discuss things, but really they're not anything bound in any way. So during the initial assessment meeting, a parent, if English is not your primary language, it's okay to ask for documents to be translated into your native language. And it's also okay to ask for an interpreter. And I've, navigated families where they understand English, they speak English fluently, even though English is not their primary language. But I also encourage them to ask for an interpreter just in case, because even though most families will understand conversational English, when you have your initial IEP assessment meeting, you'll notice a lot of the vocabulary is full of acronyms, full of jargon, full of terms that you might not use in everyday conversation. And so that's why it's helpful to have an interpreter there to be able to break things down and explain things. And if you, as a parent, have questions during the process, have questions about why your child was assessed a certain way, or you want to provide input, and it's nice to have, again, review the documentation in advance in a language that you understand, and ask for an interpreter at the meeting if English is not your primary language. And sometimes even, again, if you're comfortable, it's okay to ask for an interpreter. It's also important to note that review the documents before you sign. And so you don't have to sign the documents at the end of the meeting. Just take it home to review, or in this case, because it's virtual, oftentimes an IEP team member will email the document in a draft form. And so, if you have questions or need clarifications, that's a good time to bring that up, because sometimes if there are questions as you review the document, you might need to call another meeting with particular persons related to that, really to clarify any questions. So you have, again, right to call additional meetings if needed, because the important thing is for you as a parent and caregiver is that you have a right really to understand what's going on with your child, because when you're signing these services that are individualized to your child's educational needs. So some IEP team or IEP meeting tips, because of in this case, the virtual IEP meetings that are happening now, I recommend making sure the meeting link works, making sure your internet or phone connection is stable, and that your video and microphone is working. Because if you check that beforehand, you can always email your child's either case manager or program specialist or another IEP team meeting member, and let them know that your links aren't working, and then try to find a creative way either to make it work or to reschedule the meeting. Another tip that I encourage families is that at every meeting, and especially this initial assessment meeting to see if your child is eligible for an IEP, is that the meeting notes are important because if it's not in writing, it doesn't happen. And so in order to make sure it captures your concerns, it captures other staff members' concerns, allocate some time, even before the start of the meeting, excuse me, at the start of the meeting, you can say, well, can we reserve 10 minutes before the meeting ends so that we can just go over the meeting notes. And so that can be embedded as part of the agenda, is that, at the end of the agenda, go over the meeting notes. So again, as a parent or caregiver, that's something that you have a right to ask for. Also with IEPs, and especially with distance learning, IEPs now must describe how the special education services or related services will be provided. So if it's in a distance learning platform, how is that going to happen? And it could be as detailed and as descriptive as the team agrees to. If for some reason there is a person that provides pushback and says, no, we can't do that. We can't provide speech therapy over Zoom for some reason. Then you just, kindly ask for any rules or policies that might, state that. There shouldn't be any, as far as I know. Speech therapy can happen in a virtual setting. How that happens is up to the IEP team and the staff, your child's educational staff members, and how they will support that. And those services and support appear on the designated instructional service page on the IEP. And usually, and especially with virtual setting now, you do want to specify duration and frequency. And this is one example. This is meant for more in-class instruction, but for a virtual setting, it could be as specific, whether it's a one-to-one session, how long is it, 30 minutes, how many days per week, is it 1 day per week, 2 days per week, is it if it's a group session, you want to clarify that. And for many of us, especially here, and as a parent who has a deaf and hard of hearing child, there is deaf and hard of hearing consultation services. So you might want to check with your child's school district to see if there's what's called an interim deaf and hard of hearing teacher. And usually that's a teacher who specializes in deaf and hard of hearing needs. And so in my case, my child has a deaf and hard of hearing itinerant teacher, and my child's IEP has things like accommodations. So because this is a distance learning platform now, she ensures that my child's teachers know to provide captioned video support if there are videos that they're captioned. She also provides a tablet which has live captioning, speech to text, so that my child is able to read what's going on during lectures. So those are just one of a few examples in terms of what's offered in services and supports. And in terms of related services,
April,
yes.
I want to also, I think we should also mention that services, should specify the duration and frequency. This example, 1-to-1 session, 30 minutes, that sometimes in these meetings, we find that the providers will say, students get 30 minutes, one time a week in a group setting. That's what we offer. And I think it should be, I think we need to remember this is an IEP, Individualized Education Program. So at any point in time when you're sitting in a meeting and you hear the key phrase, our children are offered this, it's not about what other children receive. It is specifically about what your child needs versus receives, if that makes sense to you, because I know they do have to put in pockets of time for for the service providers, speech therapists. You know, they only have so many minutes in a day. But if your child would benefit from a 45-minute session versus a 15-minute session, or individualized sessions versus sitting in a group session, that should be what dictates the service that is provided versus we only offer one-to-one sessions for 30 minutes 2 times a week. Okay, so to remember to be individualized in that service.
Mhm. And thank you for the reminder. And that is very important because really the services can also be as creative as well. I know when my child was at school, when they provided a group session, at the time, my child wasn't quite comfortable in a group session, but we found a workaround with it in terms of group session would be recess time. So during I believe recess was about 15 minutes each, 2 different times. And so that was, so in his particular case, it was 15 minutes, and it was actually probably 4 times a week because there was 2 15-minute sessions for recess because my child's speech therapist could be on the playground, helping with, engaging my child with his other peers. So it was that creative, it was that individualized, and even group sessions could be with what they call push in or pull out. So there were times where there were children who were from the general education setting. They would come in and participate in speech therapy sessions in more of a collaborative, playing games. It's not like we're sitting in a group just practicing how to say words or articulate. It was articulation through playing board games. It was articulation through, reading a favorite book. So it can get that creative. And as a parent, since you know your child best, it is okay to sort of think outside of the box, especially now with a virtual setting, to see how those services and supports are met. So again, thank you, Shanley, for that reminder, because it's important to realize that IEP is very much individualized.
And April, we actually have a question. One parent wants to know who actually takes the notes for the meetings. And the second part of that question is, are you allowed to record the meetings? So those are really good questions.
Yes. So usually at the beginning of the meeting, there's usually someone who's designated to take notes. So there isn't any one particular person, but it's usually an IEP, the school staff member who will do it. So an example could be I've had a speech therapist take notes, and usually this particular speech therapist might do it because they're just great at note taking. Or in another case, a special education teacher would do it because he was able to take notes very efficiently and be able to listen in on the conversation as well. So it's not specific to any one person. A parent can take notes as well and contribute that to the meeting notes. I've done that on occasion where I've taken notes during the meeting, and when I take home my child's IEP document and review the meeting notes, even though I've reviewed it during the meeting, I look at it again and see, oh, there are certain things that I felt was important. I had it in my notes, and I was able to have that added in. So again, the person who's taking notes is really agreed upon at the meeting, and you could definitely ask who's taking notes, and then set aside time to review that before, 10 to 15 minutes before the meeting ends. And when you take it home and you see something that maybe has been omitted, or if you've taken personal notes that you would like to add, then yes, you can request to have them added in. In terms of recording, it's general courtesy to ask the school district at least 24 hours in advance to record. And so when you provide that notice, you can record, people have used their smartphones. And likewise, when you provide that notice, that you would like the meeting recorded. When you say that, it's up to the parent or caregiver to provide the recording device. The school district will not come and provide a recording device. When you make the request, it's inferred that you are the person doing the recording and saving the recording. The school district will not provide a transcript of the meeting. That's up to you because you provided the request. And also, if a request like that is asked for, then the school district also can come in with a staff person to record the meeting as well and keep a copy for their records. So I hope that answers that question. But yes, a meeting can be recorded, and whoever takes the meeting notes really is designated at the time of the meeting. And it's usually someone who's proficient at taking notes. So usually the meeting notes has a particular structure to it. I usually like to see meeting notes at the very top, list all of the meeting attendees who participated or who attended, first and last names and their titles, because when I review the meeting notes, then it gives me a reminder of who attended the meeting. You know, any discussions, even if they were opinions, to really have that stated as facts. You know, there was a parent opinion, there was a staff member's person opinion, really to state the facts so that it gives a clear, as you're reading the meeting notes, it gives you really a clear representation of what happened and not just a glossed over story. So again, you know, that's why it's important to review that at the end. Sean Renee, were there any other questions or?
Nope, that was the only one,
Okay.
but feel free to chime in.
Yes, it's you know, and again, a lot of this might be new for many of you, but I'm hoping for those who might be more experienced that there are some nuggets of information here for you to take away. So this last piece here, I have resources, and I really sort of tailored it more for deaf and hard of hearing families. The first one, which I've used often, is the Assembly Bill 1836, or it's better known as the Deaf Children's Bill of Rights. One of the things that you will, as parents and caregivers, experience often going forward is that you will have a special education director or a program specialist who may at the time know, you know, exactly what children who are deaf and hard of hearing or who are deaf and hard of hearing have additional co-occurring conditions or diagnoses, what their needs are, but the turnover rate can be high. So sometimes you will have, again, a program specialist you work wonderfully with, but who ends up transitioning to another position. And it's, you know, and it's happened often enough in my case where, you know, every 2 to 4 years, there's a new person. So having this Deaf Children's Bill of Rights comes in handy just as a reminder to what your child is entitled to in terms of a specialized instruction and any related services that's tied to deaf and hard of hearing population. The other resource is just ASL content standards. It's more of a guide. It was developed by Gallaudet University. It's good to reference because there are families who might look for those ASL only options. And this is a good guide in terms of what ASL content standards are for grades for kindergarten through 12th grade. Likewise, for those families who feel in terms of public school or inclusion programs, as Sean mentioned, special day programs, or even mainstream into general education, knowing what California's Common Core standards, and there's a link to review to see really what's expected of children who are in a general education setting, because even if your child is in a more specialized instructional class or a specialized day or special day class, or SDC for short, your child has a right to have access to general education curriculum. And what I find is distressing at times, especially in the early days with my own children, was that, my child's special education teacher, who happened to be, just very knowledgeable, would have to fight really to have, at that time, look for general education, kindergarten curriculum or first grade curriculum and so on to bring into, because really the default resources that were given to him or her at the time was really just basic, resource material, but not necessarily educational material. And again, in terms of the IEP, when you're going through the assessment process, going through developing IEP goals and determining placement, really this is for the educational benefit of your child. And in order to get that educational benefit, you want to make sure that your child is learning what all the other children are learning at school. So give that same level playing field, and just really understand that it's not just coloring sheets or not just fill in the blank worksheets throughout the day or watching videos. It's actually doing general education work. So, so now that most school districts right now are using the distance learning platform, I provided a California Department of Education's frequently asked questions about distance learning, and it provides, a lot of the common questions in terms of, length of instruction and how that instruction is implemented. Another resource I provided was a guidance on face coverings. In this case, I copied and pasted this particular snippet because I felt it was important for children in our who are deaf and hard of hearing, is that, the ability to see the speaker's mouth is important. I wanted to provide an image of, all possible face mask coverings, but I couldn't find one that was quite satisfactory. But you might want to look up face shields, or there are face masks that have window openings so that, a child can see the speaker's mouth, because at this time, there is concern whether, staff member teachers, if in-class instruction happens, you want to make sure that all of the teachers know that your child who might have hearing issues, that face-to-face and lip reading support is essential. So that document provides just basic guidance on that.
April, so a question for parents who have a deaf plus student, which means a deaf or hard of hearing student with other special needs. If the offer that the districts are providing are other than a DHH, a deaf and hard of hearing program, some are offering like a mild to moderate special day classroom or a moderate to severe special day classroom, meaning a classroom with multiple disabilities, a different range of them, but not necessarily specific to a child who has a hearing loss. And then offering to give them these services with someone who, and I'm using air quotes, knows signs, meaning they know maybe the alphabet, or they know how to sign more, or, help, something, one word, two words. What is the recourse parents have when they are offered a program like that, when the child's mode of communication is sign language?
So I don't, if hopefully you can see this, but I'm circling this here. It's in the California Education Code. And when that happens, this is what I like to use and really let parents know often, is that your child, should be taught by teachers or professionals who are credentialed in your child's specific impairment. So if, Shannon, you mentioned if your child's school district mentions, oh, they have someone who knows sign, and I will also, in terms of empathize in that, and that situation has happened in my case as well, is that I say, okay, but you have to go back to the IEP. It's individualized. It's an individualized education plan, and really the services and supports need to meet the specific needs of your child. And so if they do not currently have a professional who's credentialed to teach your child, it's up to the school district to find one. And so in this case, it could be, this is one example. Usually, there could be an itinerant deaf and hard of hearing teacher in the school district that will come and assist your child as a resource, if that's what's deemed as appropriate. If your child needs an interpreter, a sign language interpreter, then the district needs to find someone or hire someone who can be the sign language interpreter, even in a virtual setting. If your child needs other sort of accommodations or assistive, like I mentioned, captioning support, then the school district needs to find a way to provide that, because as I mentioned before, this is a free and appropriate public education. It's free and it needs to be appropriate and individualized to your child's specific needs. So as a parent or caregiver, that's something you can refer to at least this California Education Code.
So I'm sorry.
Yes.
So to piggyback on your question, if you go back to slide number 11,
Mm-hmm.
so in our services page where we talk about duration and frequency, so if they find that this specific child needs a special day class that is mild to moderate or moderate to severe, and we're looking at the teacher requirements, and they decide that this is the type of classroom they're going to go into, and we're going to give them itinerant services, I think parents need to think about this DHH consultation service. So your child is in a classroom for 3 to 4, maybe 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. They're going to give you 60 minutes each, 4 times a month. So that's 1 hour, 4 times a month with someone who can communicate fluently with your child. So if they offer that, would you, how would you go about saying, I need an increase in time for that itinerant teacher to be in that classroom? 1 hour, 4 times a month is not enough. How do you increase that time if they are definitive about having a child outside of a DHH classroom?
Right, and this is where IEPs can be creative. So in this specific, and this was just an example in terms of, this is meant for consultation. So in this specific case, consultation could be that a person who's knowledgeable with DHH would provide basic consultation for 60 minutes a week. And that would be, reminding a teacher to adjust the lighting or adjust the acoustics in the classroom. So it's those types of consultation, but in terms of support or even resource support, that could change into DHH resource support services. I know districts have certain labels for how they provide these support services, but in terms of consultation generally just means providing advice or general consult, but it's not actual teaching. So when you want someone who provides instruction, that would change. So it could be DHH resource support, or it could be, I've had other families who've had creative IEPs where they've had a one-to-one parent educator, really a DHH resource teacher, but it could also function as an aid as well, and be able to sign and be able to sort of co-teach in the class, and be able to, so as the special day class teacher in a mild moderate class is teaching, then this specialized teacher would be there as a one-to-one support person, providing the signing. And so it can get that creative. Unfortunately, I don't want to get too specific because I'm not knowledgeable in terms of how, the specific description, Sean Renee, unless you have a specific example.
No, there weren't.
Really, yeah, but it's one of those things you need to ask for. And when it's just consultation, that should be a red flag, because that's just a person really is just providing suggestions and supports, but not necessarily providing assistance and direct instruction. So again, if a school district is saying, well, we only have this special day class, this mild moderate teacher is sort of knowledgeable in air quotes and sign and knowledgeable and sign, then you have to sort of be more specific and say, okay, well, what are some other resource
Options.
support options are there? Can we bring in, again, a teacher who is fluent and I go back here, who is credentialed, not knowledgeable, but is credentialed to that specific impairment. And that's where you really need to go. And how they classify that in terms of services, that's when that's up to the school district. But really, as a parent or caregiver, you don't need to be really an expert in that, but you just refer to this educational code, and you'd be surprised how the IEP team essentially will like, oh, this parent knows what he or she is talking about. Yeah, so really just use that as seed, and that will definitely open the door.
We have 5 minutes left. I would like to, I don't see any questions in the chat box. I'm going to maybe unmute everyone and see if there are any questions. No. Let's see. No questions. Or okay, wait, we have more. So in the chat box, are you aware of any options to delay but not decline the IEP services? Our district has not gotten back in person for the pre-K programs, and we would like a pre-K placement, but the virtual is not an option for a variety of reasons. So are you aware of how you can delay it but not decline the IEP services? Oh, hold on a second. I think you are on mute. Just a second, April. There we go.
All right, so to answer the question is that if your child is eligible for the assessment process, but as a parent or caregiver, you want to delay that, yes, that can happen. And that is actually currently happening with many families. And so in terms of navigation considerations, I would say definitely at least have that assessment process initiated, so that at least when it comes to determining the goals and the placement, you know, again, have sort of a rough draft in place. And then as part of the discussion that as a parent or caregiver that you would like to delay, then that would be an IEP team meeting discussion. And there are options for that. So if there is, you want to delay distance learning for any capacity, and make sure that's in the meeting notes, because one of the things you don't want to be on the hook for is that the district will say, well, we tried to reach out to the parent, but the parent is refusing. And I put refuse in sort of the same air quotes, is that you just want to be transparent. It's like, no, I'm not refusing the services. I just want, you know, acknowledge, I just want to delay the process and state your reasons. It could, some families have medically fragile children, you know, in addition to deaf and hard of hearing, so they have a valid reason. Some families have a high risk family member who lives at home, and some districts are doing a blended sort of distance learning in class, you know, and some families want to delay. That's perfectly fine. And especially during the unprecedented times, districts are flexible. So give your school district, your child's school district, that flexibility, but just be transparent about it, because again, you don't want to be on the hook of, you know, anything that may happen if for some reason you aren't open about delaying the process. So, and families who have requested it, you know, have been successful in terms of delaying it for a year.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I would like to, I'm going to pop in. Hi, April. I would like to thank you for coming and doing this wonderful workshop for our turning 3 kids, and you and FRN. This was a great one. It's full of information. I will be sending out the PowerPoint to our participants in the workshop. And also, I would like for the participants to know you'll also receive like a survey at the end. It helps us kind of figure out, CEID, kind of figure out what kind of workshops we want to have for you that are available and what you're looking for. So please be on the lookout for that email. And I just want to thank you all for coming to join us. It was really great. And we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.